What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And Chris, the Cavs were able to overcome the Miami flu. That's the biggest takeaway from tonight's game for me. They came away with a 126-106 victory over the Miami Heat. And Chris, I understand and I know that there's so much to go through with this game, especially when you talk about the Jimmy Butler antics that are going down and with the Heat and all these different things. But Chris, what was your favorite part of the ball game that you got to witness tonight?
I don't know that I had one. I thought it was just a fine game. I guess the thing that stood out to me most about this one is that, Jaylen Tyson is somebody who, at the college level, he was a scorer, he was a playmaker, he had the ball in his hands constantly, and he's been forced to adapt into this different role as a rookie. The Rising Stars rosters were released, and he was nowhere to be found, and that's because he hasn't gotten a consistent opportunity to play. This is a deep team. This is a talented team. It's the best team in the Eastern Conference, and he was drafted 20th overall, and opportunities have been scarce. But for him, when he's gotten the opportunities, he isn't going into these games with this idea of, I've got to go out there and score. I've got to go out there and make shots. It's just, what can I do to impact winning at a high level? What can I do to make a positive difference when I'm out there on the floor? And, in college, he wasn't known as a defender. In college, he wasn't known as a quote-unquote winning player, diving for 50-50 balls, all of those different little things that tend to get a rookie on the floor a little bit quicker. So I thought that showed a lot of maturity from him. And you look at the stat sheet and you say, I don't know, he had 5 points, just a couple of rebounds, few assists. What do you really do out there? Well, he did the things that the Cavs have been asking him to do. They needed his size. They needed his rebounding. They needed his defense. They needed him to do a lot of little things. They needed him to guard Duncan Robinson and chase him around all these different screens and stuff like that. So I just think you see a maturity from a rookie who has this understanding of what he has to do in order to impress his teammates and in order to impress his coaches and in order to impress the front office. And it's very few of the things that he was drafted for. It's very few of the things that scouts liked about him going back to his time at Cal. And I was just impressed that, he was able to accept that kind of role. And he was able to play and be effective in that kind of role.
Chris, I must take it a step further. It's the opposite of what was on his scouting report coming into the NBA draft. He was known as a non-defender. He was a guy that, when you look at what his weaknesses were, defense was on that list, right? And when you talk about
he knows that too. He's aware of that.
He's very aware of it. He came into his draft when we first talked to him. The first thing he said to us was that he wanted to be an all defensive team player in his rookie season, right? Yeah. And we were all like, okay, kid, we don't even know if you're going to make the rotation. You're not going to get a whole lot of minutes. This team just went to the Eastern Conference semifinals, all of these different things. But he knew coming in, day one, he got drafted, got on a flight, got to Cleveland. Next day, he had the mental awareness that he wasn't going to have the same impact, but he had the confidence of the same player that he was when he was at Cal. And I think that, like you mentioned, Chris, is a mature factor. But again, mentioning the box score, this podcast is not for the box score watchers. And I think we can say that very blatantly on this show because we go into a little bit more in depth and we talk a lot about Dean Wade, who is not a box score filler. We talk about these guys in a different way that you have to to understand what we're talking about, you have to actually watch the games. And Chris and I pride ourselves on either Chris being at almost every game of the NBA season, me being at or watching every game of the NBA season. Like, that is what it takes to understand what Jaylen Tyson, Dean Wade, all these other, Ty Jerome, who gets a bad rap by some of the fans around the league because of what he wasn't able to accomplish earlier in the season, not what he's doing now. But you mentioned the Duncan Robinson thing, and I pulled up these stats because I figured we were going to talk about this. Jaylen Tyson basically guarded Duncan Robinson for 5 minutes tonight, and he allowed just 2 of 6 from the field, 2 of 5 from 3-point range. And the team scored 22 points for the Miami Heat, but Duncan Robinson scored just 9, and he assisted on 1 ball, right? And we understand there was 1 bad foul by Tyson where he fouled a 3-point shot. That's not what you want to do in that possession. But there were other times, not just on Duncan Robinson. We're talking about switching. We're talking about physicality. And we're talking about energy. And Donovan Mitchell talked about this a little bit after the game, saying how, like, he was getting upset with himself for missing a couple of shots because he was known as a scorer in college. But him being himself, him bringing the energy, him being a hustle player and changing his pedigree has helped this team and has helped him become a fan favorite when it comes to the fans around the league, when it comes to the fans of the Cavaliers, because nobody seems like they want to give up Jaylen Tyson when we talk about all these trade talks going down.
Yeah, and Jaylen talked about it after the game. He said, the process of staying ready, a lot of it is mental. He said it's hard not playing. Everybody wants to play. He's a competitor. He wants to be out there for as long as he can. But he's just trying to lean on the vets. He's just trying to stay as confident as possible. And he's just trying to take advantage of the opportunities when he does get those opportunities. And tonight was one of those opportunities. The Cavs went into this, and Kenny Atkinson had 3 names that he was debating between Jaylen Tyson, Ty Jerome, and Sam Merrill. Those were the guys that were in the running to start. Sam Merrill was ruled out about an hour before tip-off. Kenny got the word that Sam wasn't going to be able to play because of his illness. So then it became a 2-person debate. And he was contemplating Ty Jerome, but I think there were a couple of things. Number one, Kenny wanted Jaylen's size. He wanted his rebounding, and he wanted his defense. And again, that goes to say, like, the maturity, the evolution that he's already made. They went with him because of his defense, not something that he was ever known for in college. And I think Kenny wanted, as much as he possibly could, to create a starter reserve balance when it came to ball handling responsibilities. And he knew that Donovan was going to be the primary ball handler, and he wanted somebody that was going to man the second unit that was different than Craig Porter Jr. They didn't have Karis LeVert tonight. They didn't have Darius Garland, obviously. So they needed to try and stagger those minutes between Donovan and Ty as much as they possibly could. So all of that led them to Jaylen. And, the last time he had an opportunity to start, it was once again when Darius was out, and he capitalized on that. And tonight he got an opportunity, and according to Kenny Atkinson, Jaylen played to his role as perfectly as Kenny would want. And it allows the Cavs to, trust these young guys. It allows the Cavs to take these opportunities when it's the first game of a back-to-back, or you're in the middle of 5 games in 7 nights, and you steal some time for Darius Garland to rest. Or maybe down the road, you steal some time for Donovan Mitchell to rest, or maybe you steal some time for Max Strus to rest. Having guys like this who step up when their number is called and they play to their role the way that Jaylen did tonight, the way that Craig Porter Jr. did tonight, that just gives Kenny Atkinson a freedom and a confidence to do this big picture plan that he has put in place, and not worry about, are we going to lose a game because of it? Or are we going to, not get the contributions from whoever it may be that we give this extended playing time to? Every time that Kenny has gone to Jaylen in a bigger spot, he's done pretty well. And the same thing with Craig Porter Jr. And it's just, that's the mark of this team. It shouldn't be a surprise. Maybe it's a surprise that the Cavs won by 20, considering they only had 10 guys dressed and they are missing half of their nightly rotation, basically. But it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that they were still able to play well. And Donovan talked about that in the locker room, and so did Kenny Atkinson. Because that's just what they've done all season long. That's just who they are. They rely on their depth. They trust their guys. They believe in everybody that they're going to go to, whether it's Craig Porter Jr., who is averaging 4.5 minutes in January, or it's Jaylen Tyson, who was making a second career start. And then the mark of a great team is being able to, basically overcome everything that is thrown at them. And tonight was another example of that.
And you talked a little bit about the lineup decisions from Kenny Atkinson. I think another big part of this is allowing Ty Jerome to run the second unit, to have him be your anchor as in the second unit, whether that's alongside Donovan Mitchell, whether that's alongside Craig Porter Jr. or whoever he might have been playing with. It allowed them to have someone that they could trust at the point of attack on the offensive end to lead that kind of offense. And especially when there were minutes when Donovan Mitchell wasn't on the floor, Ty had to figure out what he was going to do, where he was going to go. And that allowed, with Jaylen Tyson starting, it allowed him to have, one, more freshness, and two, have an understanding of where he was going to be at and what rotations he was going to work with throughout the game. The other portion of Jaylen Tyson's mentality and just his mental maturity, I think it's like most players that average 20 want to, even in the small minutes that they get, they think that they're going to come in and just start jacking up shots. Jaylen Tyson doesn't do that. He takes the right shot in the right time and the right opportunities when they're given to him. Sure, there's still some things he needs to work on. I still think his three-pointer above the break needs work. I think he's very much more reliable when it comes to the corner threes, because that's what we are used to seeing him work on when we get into the practice facility. But that's neither here nor there. We want to see him continue to grow. This is rookie season. He's playing to the caliber that we have expected, and I think he's playing a little bit higher on the defensive end than what we might have thought. But Chris, I want to move on to other guys that we felt like had an impact on tonight's game, and we've talked about him over the last couple of nights, especially with the defensive identity and the three defensive-minded players being out: Isaac Okoro, Caris LeVert, and Dean Wade. Obviously, Caris LeVert can get his own on the offensive end as well. But Max Strus once again stepped up on the defensive end. He's been a guy that the Cavs and Kenny Atkinson have turned to, and he's mentioned that they were going to go to, especially with having to guard the opposing team's best perimeter player on that end of the floor. And we talk about him coming into the game after guarding Cade Cunningham. This time he had to guard Tyler Hero. He was 2 of 7. Tyler Hero was 2 of 7 from the floor in around 7 minutes of playtime, being matched up with Max Strus, according to matchup data from NBA.com. I just think the physicality, and you could tell Tyler Hero was getting irritated with not only like the physicality of Max Strus, but also his competitiveness. Like, he wasn't going to back up. He wasn't going to back down, even if there was a foul call. And again, like, Max is guarding from 94 feet. And in the first half alone, he played 18 of 24 available minutes. He ended up playing 33 minutes, which was the most of a Cavalier tonight. But, Chris, just Max Strus's defensive prowess and presence has been something that has come alive as well. And it's funny that we've been talking about defense a majority of this podcast for a team that came into the Detroit Pistons game ranked 29th in the NBA in January in defensive rating. So just what have you seen from the change and also leaning on these guys on the defensive end to have a more focused-minded in that regard?
Well, this is a nuanced conversation, Ethan, and it's something that you have to put into perspective. Miami is not a very good offense. If they're going to win games, they want it to be a little bit of a slugfest. They want it to be low scoring. They're middle of the pack in terms of offensive rating, and that takes into account games played with Jimmy Butler. And they obviously did not have Jimmy Butler. They're going through the whole Jimmy Butler saga. and they're a very different offensive team without him on the floor. They just function in a different kind of way. And Kalel Ware was really, really bad tonight, so much so that he got benched for a majority of the second half of this one. And then the other night against Detroit, Detroit is bottom 10 in the NBA in offensive rating. So I do think it has been a step forward defensively in the last two games for the Cavs, and they deserve credit for that. And if we're going to sit here and we're going to say, through a first stretch of January, they're the second worst defensive team in the NBA, and they're right there in the conversation with the Washington Wizards when they play well defensively, we certainly have to give them credit. And it has been a positive step forward. The game against Detroit was a positive from the defensive end of the floor. As Max Strus said, it was a statement-like performance for them. And tonight, with the exception of the third quarter, where they gave up 43 points to Miami and allowed the Heat to kind of build some momentum going into the fourth, it was a really, really good defensive performance for the Cavs once again. And they deserve credit for that. But again, in terms of putting it in perspective, it was Miami. It was Detroit. It's a little bit different when you're talking about playing against, upper echelon offensive teams. What do the Cavs look like on defense then? What does Max Strus look like when there are multiple weapons on the offensive end of the floor that the Cavs have to deal with, not just, Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo, basically. So there are a lot of things that go into this, but yes, it was another promising sign, especially when you're talking about Max, because during this stretch where the Cavs are going to be without Dean Wade and they're going to be without Isaac Okoro and Karis LeVert, maybe all three of them through the All-Star break, maybe. It's going to be on Max to take those challenges. And when you see him have success against Cade Cunningham, that gives you a lot of confidence if you're a coaching staff. That gives you a lot of confidence if you're his teammates. And then you see him once again have success in the next opportunity against a guy in Tyler Hero who may be announced as an all-star reserve on Thursday when they make that announcement. So yeah, positive signs for Max. He continues to say he wasn't good enough on the defensive end of the floor at the beginning of the season when he finally came back from his injury, his beginning of the season. But, he's been working on it. He's aware of it. He took the mirror test. And in the first two opportunities that he has gotten to fill the void of Dean Wade / Karis LeVert / Isaac Okoro, Max has been up to the challenge, and Max has been effective in that role.
I think that's a good understanding of how you can put it in perspective for the teams that they're playing. Obviously, there's different metrics that you can look at, but also you just have to do the eye test sometimes, Chris, and be like, this offense isn't the best in the league. That's why defense has been playing better, right? But I think there are situations where you can look at positives, not only on the defensive end, but also on the offensive end. And one of them, for me, coming into the game, I wrote this for the preview article for tonight's game, was Evan Mobley continuing to get his legs up back under him. This was just his third game since having his calf strain, returning from his calf strain, and he's continued to look better in every single game that he's been back. Tonight, he had 22 and 15, and he was able to go at Bam Adebayo. He was more physical. He was more attack-minded. And I know that we've talked about how Evan Mobley is going to be one of the best defenders on the floor, if not the best defender on the floor whenever he's out there. But his offense takes the Cavs to another level. It takes their ceiling to another level. And I think when you talk about being able to compete with somebody, especially Bam Adebayo, who's one of the renowned defenders in the NBA, renowned big men in the NBA, especially when he has Ware next to him. Obviously, that wasn't the case for portions of the second half because Ware was playing poorly, but there's a different confidence level for Bam when he has a big man next to him, so he doesn't have as much of a responsibility in the paint. He can play his offensive game. He's more spaced out, all these different things. And yet, Evan Mobley still looked like he had the confidence that we wanted to see from him in the beginning of the season. The other portion of that is that Kenny Atkinson has set up and continuously set up plays for him to go and attack the basket. And I think that's huge when you talk about getting somebody reacclimated and reintegrated into the offense, especially after having 2 games in a row where he didn't play to his caliber on the offensive end, at least.
It was characterized that Evan is about 75 to 80% of where he was before his calf injury. Before the calf injury, and that's the hard thing about some of these kinds of injuries is that there's an understanding of moving the wrong way. It could catch. Um, Calf injuries are tricky. Calf injuries can be re-aggravated. Calf injuries can lead to Achilles. So you do have to be really, really careful of these things. And I think, Evan is still trying to figure out, all right, what is my body going to allow me to do? What movements can I do? What movements can't I do? Are there some movements that I can't do at this point? So it was characterized that he's about 75 to 80% of where he was before the calf injury, before that soreness crept up. But there were positive signs tonight, right? A couple of ferocious dunks, the 15 rebounds that he had, including 4 on the offensive end. His first touch in the game, he didn't settle for a pull-up jumper. He tried to take it off the dribble. He missed the shot, battled for an offensive rebound, but you could sense like that level of aggressiveness that the Cavs had talked about for the first half of the season that was so different for Evan compared to years past. That was there, and that was there from the opening tip. So positive signs from him, no doubt. Got to the rim, like I said, a couple of dunks, the rebounds, the defense, the rim protection, all the different things that make him a likely all-star. So, yeah, I think it's still going to take him a little bit of time. We'll have to see how he looks tomorrow. Second game of a back-to-back. That's not easy, especially against a team like Atlanta when you've got to deal with Onyeka Okongwu. Is Larry Nance Jr. going to play? What's the situation with Clint Capella? A team that has beaten the Cavs twice. It's a late flight out of Miami. Their flight was delayed because of a crew issue, too. So they're probably not going to get home until like 3 in the morning, probably. It's a 7 o'clock start instead of a 7:30 start. All of those different things tie into it. So we'll have to see how Evan looks, Evan specifically, because he's still finding his rhythm after the calf soreness, how he specifically looks on the second night of a back-to-back. But like I said, promising signs, no doubt. This was the first game, I think, since the calf soreness popped up where you're like, okay, that looks like all-star Evan Mobley.
I still think his shot was a little bit flat tonight. The 3-point shot.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen for a little bit longer, actually.
I agree, and I think once he gets that back, you'll feel like he's been like all the way rejuvenated. But I agree with you. I felt like he was like on the cusp, and I think 80% is a good percentage for that. But Chris,
Donovan and Darius also joked in the locker room that Evan will never take another technical foul free throw. Because he missed his opportunity the other night. Donovan was very confused at first that Evan was getting that technical, and so was Darius. Darius was like, wait, what? 4? 4's taking the technical? And obviously, Kenny Atkinson and the guys, they did that so that Evan could get into a rhythm, and they knew that he was getting 2 more free throws after that because he had just gotten fouled. So they wanted him an opportunity to get to the free throw line, build some confidence, build some rhythm, and then he missed the technical. So both Donovan and Darius in the locker room tonight against Miami joked that Evan is not going to take another technical as long as both those guys are on the floor with him.
I think that's as it should be. I think everybody that was in the arena the other night like scratched their head and was like, why is Evan Mobley like we are looking at the 2 best free throw shooters on this team? What is going on? So I definitely think that's funny. That's a good note. But Chris, just quickly, you don't think that Evan Mobley would be a DMP rest tomorrow or something like that when it comes to be playing in the back-to-back? Obviously, Jalen Johnson's out. Don't know the Clint Capella situation. Larry Nance Jr. will more than likely play because of the whole Jalen Johnson season-ending injury with a torn labrum. So, do you think that Evan Mobley gets a DNP rest, or you think he's going to play tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I have no feel on that because I think it's going to depend on what happens tomorrow when Kenny Atkinson gets the report from the medical staff and from the strength and conditioning group that says, either he's in the red or he's in the green or he's in the yellow, and you have to monitor those things. So Kenny gets that information usually day of game. And I asked him tonight, I said, are there other plans because you're resting Darius tonight because it's 5 games in 7 days because the All-Star break is right around the corner. Like, are there other plans to go through with this big picture plan of resting other guys down the stretch here? And he said those things are wait and see. It's based on the data that he gets from all the different people that are involved in those decisions. So he said because it's so fluid, he can't give me or anybody a specific answer at this point of where they are going into tomorrow's game against Atlanta. So I wouldn't rule it out. I would never rule it out, especially when somebody is coming back from such a tricky and delicate injury. But Kenny didn't make any hints one way or another. And I don't think my source will have a good enough idea until tomorrow morning when that data is presented to the coaching staff.
Okay, and I don't want to keep you too long, Chris, because I know you got your own early flight in the morning to get back to Cleveland. But
And I got to
Chris,
write still.
well, yeah, so don't want to keep you too late for that. Anyway, I just want to quickly go over some other players that had good games today. Ty Jerome, George Niang combined for 35 points off the bench. Ty had 7 assists. George was 3 of 6 from 3. They combined for 5 threes. I just think, like, we keep having this difficult conversation about George Niang because everybody understands that he can be a liability on the defensive end of the floor. But if he's going to continue to shoot like this, and I know people who might have watched the first couple minutes of the first quarter and then turned the game off or whatever, were like, well, he missed the first 2, I think it was. Like, no, he came back. He was able to shoot. He was like all these other things. But Chris, when it comes to like rhythm shooting, George Niang and Ty Jerome off the bench, where do you classify them and how their importance can swing a game? And we know that Ty Jerome, and we've said this on this podcast a couple of different times, he's an X factor when he's hot, when he's playing well, and even when he's just able to stabilize the offense. But George Niang feels like, how do I describe this? A wild card when it comes to his game and how he can impact winning. How do you think the Cavs look at him, and not only as a locker room guy, but as someone that can impact on the floor?
I'm trying to figure out the best way that I can phrase this. Ethan, for however long George is on this roster, he is going to be really, really important to their success. And I think people just have to accept that. And there is this idea that people have already made up their mind that he's expendable at the trade deadline. People have already made up their mind that they should upgrade on him at the trade deadline. And people have already made up their mind that when the playoffs roll around and you get into a 7-game series against whoever it may be, that George is going to get played off the floor, that George is going to be bounced from the rotation. And I would just say, pause on those things because he is a very valuable member of this team. And Kenny Atkinson trusts him. Kenny Atkinson believes in him. His teammates trust him. His teammates believe in him. And he is rewarding them this year. If you look at their numbers as a defensive team with him on the floor, their defensive rating is 110.7. That is more than respectable for a guy who is considered a defensive liability. And when he's off the floor, it's basically the same. So whether he's on the floor, off the floor, the Cavs are playing at the same level on the defensive end of the floor. He is battling. He is making things tough on the defensive end. Look, are there teams that are going to be more difficult for him to play against? Yes. Are there going to be matchups where his physical limitations show up a little bit more? Yes. I mean, that's the case with a lot of guys around the NBA. Hell, that was the case with Kevin Love during the championship years. There were certain matchups that just weren't favorable for him because of his play style, because of his physical limitations. It's just something that you're going to have to navigate. And the good teams are able to navigate those things. So, George does a lot of positive things for this team. He is a connector on the offensive end of the floor. He's a floor spacer. He's a reliable three-point shooter. He's a pretty good cutter. He had a good cut, timely cut, high basketball IQ. And yeah, I think you mentioned it, Ethan. Behind the scenes, he's really important too. He's one of the leaders of this team. He's willing to speak up when things aren't going well, and that's been rare this year for this team. He's willing to lighten the mood. So they need a lot of the things that George brings to the table, both on and off the floor. And, as I said, for as long as he's going to be on this roster, he's going to have a place in the rotation, and he is going to be a valuable piece to who they are as a team, both on and off the floor. The personality that they have in the locker room is in large part, or in some part, tied to George. The fun, the lightheartedness, the cracking jokes. He's at the center of that. Donovan loves him. Donovan's been around him for years. So I just think, he does get a lot of criticism from this fan base. Some of it warranted. He was not good defensively last year. I think he would be the first one that would say that he wasn't in the physical condition that he probably needed to be to make that kind of impact, consistent impact on a nightly basis, especially in a playoff environment last year. But this is a different season. And credit to him for recognizing some of those limitations and some of those weaknesses and trying to address them. And, when he gets an expanded role in these kinds of situations, just like we talked about with Ty Jerome, just like we talked about with Craig Porter Jr., with Jaylen Tyson, with Max Strus, it's the same thing with George. When his minutes expand and he gets a bigger role and a bigger opportunity, more times than not throughout the course of this regular season, he has stepped up, he has played well, and he has given the Cavs what they would need out of him in that particular role. So if you look at their bench this year, he has been an integral piece of it. If you look at the steadiness, the consistency of it, the stability of it, he's been at the center of it.
Two things on that, Chris. One, because I don't know if I said it earlier, and I definitely meant to. I think Jaylen Tyson plays better with the veterans around him. So I think that was also a good move for Kenny Atkinson to put him in the starting lineup because, as we noticed when he played in the first time Darius Garland was out, he was surrounded by the core four or the core three of the core four, and that's what was mentioned when DeMar Carroll talked to us afterwards about why he made that, why Kenny Atkinson was led to make that decision, talking to DeMar Carroll, all these other things. It was to get him reps alongside the veterans of the group and how they can not only facilitate his growth, but also just pump life into him. And I think that's a very crucial feature for when we talk about Jaylen Tyson, because we see how different it can look in the garbage minutes when he's playing alongside Craig Porter Jr., Luke Travers, Tristan Thompson, all these different guys that don't get a whole lot of minutes during the rotational periods for this team. The other part being, I think you can say more than a small part of the energy in the locker room is George Niang, just solely based on what Kenny Atkinson talks about in anytime we try to have like a fun conversation with Kenny in post game press conference, pre game press conference, practice, whatever it may be, anytime he says who's the like funniest guy or whatever, it's
Mm-hmm.
always George, and it's always he's not trying to, he's just being George. And like
Yeah.
he's made comments like Darius Garland gets a couple digs in here and there, and all these other things. But like George's personality is just what it is, and if you watch the interviews with us and him, the media and him, you can tell George is like, and we've talked about this with him going after Chris on record, off record. Like, that is just his personality, how he goes about his business, and how he likes to be and likes to operate, especially in the NBA and around guys that he feels comfortable with. Chris being one of those, clearly, because he's around him almost every day. But I want to get
Now
to
2 weeks. It's not 2 weeks. Just about 2 weeks that George has been giving me crap in the locker room. It continued tonight after the game against Miami. Came hovering over. I'm having a conversation with Darius at his locker, and George is like, "What are you talking about? I need to talk to Darius. You get out of the way." I said, "No, you don't. You're just trying to prevent me from having a conversation with him, just like you were trying to prevent Max from answering my questions the other night, just like you were trying to prevent Donovan from talking to me the other night. You're just giving me a bunch of crap because you were upset about the way that I phrased a question recently.
it happens, and yeah,
Jokingly upset for all those people out there."
correct. And the Max Strus next question was hilarious. I was like, is he Marshawn lynching Chris right now? Like, what are we doing? Like, what is going on?
I
Anyway,
got one of three, though. I got one of three responded to. I'll take it. If I was a baseball player, I'd be in the Hall of Fame with that.
there you go. There you go. But last portion I want to talk about, Chris, is probably the biggest portion of tonight's game. Donovan Mitchell being Donovan Mitchell. I think we can go through this rather quickly. Like, when he had 34 points, right? And he's had 30 points in, I believe it's 5 of his last 7 games, if I remember the stat correctly. And when you talk about last season and how much this backcourt has grown, last year it was, okay, Darius is out. Donovan's going to be able to carry the load, or he's going to have to try to, especially when he was out for 6 weeks and became de facto point guard. Darius had the situation where people didn't know if Donovan was resting or was out, would he be able to carry that or shoulder that load? And this year he's been able to do that effortlessly. And I think to see Donovan be able to play how he's capable over this month, even when the Cavs are playing or lower to their standard defensively, it's shown that this is why he's an all-star starter. This is also why he is in the MVP conversation. This is also why he is the franchise face, because he's taken a step back, and we continue to say this about Donovan Mitchell. He's continued to find every single game he's played in. He's come in not knowing what he was going to have to do, but figuring out on the fly how he was going to have to impact winning. The other night,
Yeah.
it was fighting through fatigue, being able to be a defensive menace, guarding 94 feet, something that your offensive scorer would not necessarily usually do. Tonight, it was going out and getting 30. And Donovan has had this conversation a lot lately when it's like, okay, what am I doing? Sometimes they're making 30, 40, 50. And it's funny to say that because I forget who was doing an interview with FanDuel Sports for one of their side segments on the social media platforms that they have. And somebody was like, yeah, usually it was if Donovan wanted to go get 50, Donovan would go get 50. This year, it doesn't feel like he has to go and do all of that because we are playing to a different level and we're able to have his back. And I think that's a testament not only to the players around him, but Donovan being able to accept the new role that he has.
Yeah, I think tonight, Ethan, was a situation where Donovan definitely, definitely understood the assignment. And without 5 members of the nightly rotation, including his backcourt mate, who is likely going to be an all-star reserve on Thursday night, Donovan knew that the Cavs needed his scoring. That's what was required of him tonight. And you could tell that he was that level of aggressive looking for his offense. He scored the first basket of the game. It took him a while to get his first assist, even though he was in the de facto point guard role. And then as the game went on, It was more of a feel thing of, okay, if they're going to send two guys at me, I'm going to try and get more guys involved. The assists started to grow a little bit, but he knew as soon as the injury report came up, and as soon as Karis LeVert didn't make the flight, and Isaac Okoro didn't make the flight, and Dean Wade didn't make the flight, and Darius Garland, after voluntary shoot around earlier this morning, was ruled out for rest purposes because the strength and conditioning team gave Kenny Atkinson data saying, hey, he's getting to a dangerous level in terms of, his physical activity and his exertion and how many games in a row he has played and all those different kinds of things. Donovan was like, all right, probably going to have to score 30 tonight. Probably going to have to be a little bit more aggressive on the offensive end of the floor. And he was looking for his offense early in the game. He was looking for his shots early in the game. It wasn't about setting his teammates up, it was setting that tone. I also think that Donovan knows that the Cavs lost to Miami the previous time they were in Miami. And not that he took it personally or anything like that, but he wanted some get back. And the best way for him to do that was, to attack their defense, dictate terms, and be that level of aggressive.
Chris, I know exactly what you're referencing and trying to toe walk that conversation that was had in the locker room between Donovan Mitchell and Ty Jerome, where Ty was trying to egg on Donovan about the previous matchup and said, you said this one was personal, didn't you? You said this one had a little bit more meaning to it. And obviously for those who watched our episode after the last game against the Pistons, whoever Miami was playing the other night, they were avidly watching that as the game was over. It took us like 20 minutes to start interviewing players because they were so in depth and in detail watching this game. And Donovan, as he usually is, either walked in from the shower with on his phone watching the game, or was completely locked into the big screen TV that the Cavs have in their locker room to watch the game. And it felt like either he was watching Boston or he was watching Miami, but either way, he was paying attention. So I definitely think this was a game where you could tell that Donovan wanted to get his, not only because there was players out, but because there might have been something underlying. We're not going to go too far into that. Just I might put in the Ty Jerome interview so you can listen to it. But I think the Cavs tomorrow have another grudge match to settle. The only team, or one of two teams, to have beaten them twice this season, the Atlanta Hawks, come into Cleveland. Obviously, they might be getting in at the same time to the facility, but Cleveland will want to put a little handle on what they haven't done this year, with or without Evan Mobley. That's still to be determined, but you can bet that this Cavs team is going to come in ready tomorrow to make a statement that they can beat these longer teams, and even if they don't have Jalen Johnson, who was one of the bigger problems for them the last time that they played.
It's also going to be a big-time mental challenge because all-star reserves are being announced about a half hour before tip-off. Normally, the Cavs are in their pregame meeting at that point in time. Players, coaches, and they're kind of away from what is actually happening around the world, around the NBA. But there was some conversation in the locker room about seeing if that meeting could be delayed a little bit, seeing if that meeting could be rearranged a little bit so that both Evan and Darius are aware of whether or not they made the All-Star game. So that'll be interesting to see if either one, if both understands, before the game tips off, if they are indeed all-star reserves. Because, if they don't have clarity on it, they're human beings. They both want to be all-stars. And if they don't have clarity on it, if they don't have a way of finding out, because the Cavs are in their team meeting at the time that it's announced, then, it can be tough mentally. It's something that matters to these guys. Like, does it mean as much as winning a championship? No. But there are things that any individual would want to accomplish. And Darius wants to be an all-star. And Evan wants to be an all-star. And they both deserve it. They've both earned it. And having some clarity before tip-off, I think there is a belief in that locker room that it would be better for the Cavs for those guys to have some kind of information. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it and what they say, after the game about where they were when they learned their fate, how they heard about it, all whether the Cavs changed up their normal pregame routine, if they were comfortable changing up their normal pregame routine so that those guys can have an understanding of whether or not they made it.
Mental challenge. I think that's a good point, Chris, especially if Trae Young somehow sneaks into the reserves and Darius Garland or Evan Mobley are left off. Not
I'll say that there's concern. I will say that. I sense some concern from both the let's just say I sense some concern from people in the front office and from people inside that locker room about Darius maybe getting snubbed. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the results at this point in time. He is very, very deserving of it. Everybody knows that. His numbers, if you're a coach in the NBA and you're making decisions about these things, if you don't pick Darius, like you're not valuing the things that should matter most. Because every statistic that points to a player's value and a player's nightly impact shows Darius not as one of the top guards in the Eastern Conference in those metrics, but one of the top players in the entire NBA in those metrics. He has been, by any measure, eye test, deeper analytics, counting stats, whatever you want to say, by any measure, he has been one of the most impactful players in the entire NBA. And if coaches ignore that, if coaches don't recognize that, then that would be a sad state of affairs. If they reward, Trae Young or LaMelo Ball or somebody like that, then they're just not valuing the things that Darius has done to this point in the season. They're not valuing the things that should matter most when it comes to this particular decision, the All-Star reserves. So there is a little bit of nervousness. Maybe that's just natural, right? But the depth of the guard pool, I would say, is what is leading to some guys being a little bit like, is Darius going to get in? Is he not going to get in? And you start doing the numbers, and you're like, okay, if you squint hard enough, you could probably see an end result of him not making it. That's if you squint hard enough. That's if you make enough of a case for these other guys. I think he gets in. I think he's a lock. I think he should be a lock. But the feeling after the game tonight was, what if they take Cade, Dame, Trae, and Tyler Hero?
Yeah, I don't think Tyler Hero showed tonight that he's worthy of being an All-Star.
Don't do it based on one game.
I know. I'm not saying. I'm okay. I was gonna say this anyway, not to stir the pot, right? And we're moving away from the Miami Heat game and Tyler Hero because
not everybody looks like an All-Star every single night.
Correct. There's been games when neither Donovan, Darius, nor Evan have looked like All-Stars. Anyway, not to stir the pot, but what has already been claimed as his revenge season, if Darius Garland doesn't make the All-Star team and and Trae Young makes it, like he already has said that there has been a list of guards on his radar for this season. I think the list gets remade and everybody's name just gets put back on it. Like I know,
including coaches around the NBA.
Oh yeah, and the celebration, the kiss to the sky is no longer going to be solely to the sky. It's going to be at opposing players, at opposing coaches, and the trash talk, the you're too little, all of the things that we've seen very in portions of this year from Darius Garland is going to get ramped up to another level. The revenge season would definitely be upon us. And the only way that I feel like Darius would be satisfied, as even though he might cook all these other players where he's talked about having half of his list already cut through, I think the only way you get satisfied after that is by winning a chip. I think that's the only way, Chris. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in all your questions for next week's Hey Chris episode. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.